All right, good morning. It's good to see everybody. Got your Bibles? We'll be in Mark chapter 2, verse 23 is where we'll be starting today. Mark 2:23. Before we get into our lesson, though, we'll have a word of prayer. Jesse, would you mind leading us in a word of prayer? Amen. Thank you so much. All right, we're in Mark chapter 2, and we're continuing our study of ministry of Jesus, and all of this coming under the larger umbrella of Mark's purpose, which he stated in the very first verse of this book, is to show that Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So everything that we're studying is in some way pointing back to that, and it's important for us, I think, to keep that in mind as we go through this. So the way that's going to work out in the text that we're going to study today, these first two stories that we're going to look at all center around the Sabbath day. And in this telling of this, Mark is showing Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. He has the final say on what the Sabbath should be and not be. And the fact that he has that kind of authority shows that he is God, because only God can speak in that kind of way. And we'll see him demonstrate that power by a miracle that he performs. He doesn't expect us just to believe that he is the Lord of the Sabbath because he says so. He demonstrates a power that only the Lord of the Sabbath would have. And so we'll see that. We'll also get to study about the occasion of choosing the 12 apostles. That's a pivotal moment in his ministry. And then we'll get into some other things later on in chapter 3 as we have time. All right, so let's start in verse 23 of chapter 2. Now it happened as he went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and as they went, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" But he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and hungry, he and those with him, how he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest and ate the showbread, which is not lawful to eat except for the priest, and also gave some to those who were with him? And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is also Lord of Sabbath." This is a little bit of a tricky story, but really and truly, the main point is, again, Jesus is showing his place as the Lord of Sabbath. He has the final authority on all issues, and that's not something that should be questioned. But what you have at work here is something you see very commonly throughout the ministry of Jesus. There are lots of questions about the Sabbath and what should be or shouldn't be done on the Sabbath, what's lawful, what's not lawful to do on the Sabbath. And this whole debate between law and tradition. Okay? The law, as stated in the Ten Commandments, was that they were to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. There was no work that was to be done within the Sabbath day. At least no work that would constitute work for a profit. Now, the Sabbath is never meant to just mean the denial of basic human needs. They were still allowed to eat. They were still allowed to take care of their health. They were still allowed to do the things that were necessary to do on that day. And I think that's another reason why Jesus says that the Sabbath is for man and not man for the Sabbath. But they were still allowed to do all of those things, but they were not allowed to work for profit on that particular day, because it was supposed to be a day of rest, number one. Or I wouldn't say number one, but it was to be, one, a day of rest, and also a day of worship. And you think about the Israelites going through the wilderness, coming out of Egypt. You think about why those two things were so important as they make their journey to the Promised Land. One, it's going to be a long journey. You're going to need rest in order to make this journey all the way through to the end. But also, too, God is your main defense. He is the one in whom you put your sole trust and lean not on yourself. So you need a day set aside to keep your focus on Him. Even though we have a sense of urgency, we can sometimes develop a mindset, we don't need to take a break. We just need to keep going, because if we keep going, we'll get there faster. If we keep working, we'll make more, we'll accomplish more, we'll have more. We just need to keep going, we think. But that's a lot of putting our faith in our own understanding and our own ability. True success is keeping our hearts devoted and focused on God. And the Sabbath was created to help the people do that. It was a day set aside to focus on worship, to focus on rest, and focus on God. But this whole idea of that they were not to work on the Sabbath gave rise to a lot of teaching from the rabbis. The ancient Jewish Bible commentary called the Talmud, which is a collection of writings from the various rabbis through the generations, has 24 chapters devoted to trying to explain what is work and what is not work as it constitutes the Sabbath day. And just a sample of some of these things shows how overbearing this became. Because in the minds of the Pharisees, at least, once a rabbi wrote down, this is work or this is not work, to the people, that became the law of God. The tradition of the rabbis was put on an equal plane with that commandment from the 10 Commandments. And what happened was, what was supposed to be a day of rest actually became the most stressful day of the week. Because you had to pay attention to all these 24 chapters of traditions and regulations that the rabbis given, and make sure that you don't disobey any of them. And some of them are so ridiculous and so overbearing. Like, for example, the rabbis stated that you couldn't travel more than 3,000 feet from your home. Any more than that, 3,001 feet was constituted work. So all day long, you're counting your steps. You're trying to keep track of how far you can go or not go, because you don't want to break, in your mind, the law of God. You're not really breaking the law of God. You're breaking the traditions of men. But in their minds, they couldn't see the difference. The rabbi said if you toss an object in the air with your hand, you had to catch it in the other hand. Because if you tossed it up in the air and you caught it with the same hand, that was work. And if you caught it with the other hand, that wasn't work. If you toss it up in the air and catch it with the same hand, that's work. You were forbidden from carrying any object heavier than a dried fig. Well, I hope you don't need to carry anything on the Sabbath day, because there's not many things you can find that weigh less than a dried fig. No fires were allowed to be lit or put out. So you better hope it doesn't get very cold in the wintertime. No warm water could be poured into cold water. Now, cold water could be poured into hot water. That wasn't work. But hot water poured into cold water, that was work. No bathing. No more of this. Take a bath every Saturday, whether you need it or not. Not on the Sabbath day. Bathing is not allowed on the Sabbath day. One of the more comical ones I saw said that, now it said a woman, but this could go both ways, I'm sure. A woman was not allowed to look in a mirror on the Sabbath day, because she might see a gray hair or a hair out of place, and she would be tempted to pluck it. And plucking that hair would constitute work. And it shows how silly and ridiculous this came. But the sad thing is that many of these Pharisees and the people influenced by them, they really thought if you don't pay attention to all these traditions, you're going to hell. Your soul's going to be lost. And a lot of what Jesus did in His ministry was to challenge this and try to challenge people to see the difference between the law and their opinions about it and their traditions that they develop in relation to it. So you come back to this situation. All right, so the debate arises over, as Jesus and His disciples are walking through grain fields on the Sabbath day, His disciples are hungry, and so they reach out and they pluck some grain to eat. This is not something they're doing for profit. They're not trying to make money off of this. They're simply satisfying a basic human need. And the law did make provision for them to do this, by the way. They're not stealing grain out of somebody's grain field. The corners of the fields would not be harvested in order to leave food there for the poor people. So they're allowed to do this. But again, they're not harvesting grain to try to make money off of it. That would constitute work, and that would be a violation of the Sabbath. All they're doing is taking care of a basic human need. That is not a violation of the Sabbath. It was a violation of their traditions, but it was not a violation of the Sabbath. And so they question Jesus about this, and they say, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And in answer to that, Jesus poses another question to them. Question about David. And this story is found in 1 Samuel 21, verses 1 through 6. If you want to go back there and do a little further study on this. But basically what happened was, as David was fleeing from Saul was trying to kill him, and he's on the road and he's on the run, and they come to the household of Abiathar, the priest. And David and his men are famished. They are starving. They are genuinely starving. So they come to Abiathar, the priest, and they ask for food. And Abiathar informs them that the only thing he has on hand is the showbread from the table of showbread. 12 loaves of bread were placed on the table of showbread inside the tabernacle, and they were changed out every Sabbath day. And these 12 loaves of bread represented God providing bread for His people, taking care of them. 12 loaves for all the 12 tribes. He's taking care of everybody. But the law stated specifically that when this showbread was exchanged, the only persons who were allowed to eat it were the priests. The law was very clear on that. Abiathar took this showbread, which was all that he had, and he gave it to David and his men to eat, which was obviously a violation of the law. Now, the question arises regarding that was, should Abiathar have done this? My guess would be Abiathar reasoned that the law of loving your neighbor and providing for the needs of your neighbor superseded the law regarding the showbread. Much like the Egyptian midwives, instead of telling Pharaoh what was really happening, they told Pharaoh something that would make sure they preserved the life of the Jewish children that he was trying to murder. Now, I don't like to get into this because I don't like to dive in much to situational ethics. The situation could be right in one situation but wrong in another, or wrong in one situation or right in another. I don't like getting off into that because that's not up to me to decide. And that's why I would say another possibility is the Bible just records what Abiathar did without endorsing it or offering any commentary as to whether he should or should not have done it. He just did it. Often enough, the Bible does this. Like when Noah got drunk, the Bible just tells us that he did it. It doesn't offer any sort of commentary on why he did it or any of that sort of thing. It just tells us what he did. And it's very possible that Abiathar, the Bible just tells us what he did, and it wasn't something he should have done. Perhaps there would have been another way. God was not going to allow David or his men to starve. Perhaps he would have provided another way if Abiathar hadn't chosen to do this. But that's all moot because this is what Abiathar chose to do. Now, coming back to Jesus, what's his point? What's his point in telling this story? I think what he's doing is just pointing out the inconsistency of the Pharisees. They have no problem with what David did. They don't criticize him. They don't condemn him for what he did, even though it was an obvious violation of the law of God. The inconsistency is they don't condemn David for violating the law, but they do condemn Jesus and his disciples, and what they did was not a violation of the law. It is inconsistent. They condemn Jesus for not violating the law and do not condemn, did I say that right? They do condemn Jesus for not violating the law. I'm confusing myself with all this. This is what happens when the Pharisees get a hold of something. Let me try one more time. They do condemn Jesus for not violating the law, but don't condemn David for violating the law. It was inconsistent. And really the only thing they needed to get a hold of was Jesus is the Lord of Sabbath. And if he says it's not a violation for his disciples to eat grain on the Sabbath day, that's it. That's the bottom line. And that's the thing that really needs to be taken away. Now, anybody have any questions? I know that might be about as clear as mud, but anybody have any questions or comments about this?
Them going across the field there and looking at the grain, they could have done that out of habit. But you can walk across the wheat field, and before you get across it, you will have cut some off.
Right.
So they could have been out of habit the reason they did that.
Yeah. Hey.
Not necessarily the food.
Right. Oh, that's true. That's true. When I get hungry, my instincts take over. I can guarantee you that. So, anyway. Anybody else have a comment or question? Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, grain is a generic term. It could refer to almost anything that grows on a stalk like that. Okay? Anybody else? All right, so going into chapter 3 now, you have another situation that revolves around the Sabbath day. And again, it's the same point to try to validate this claim that Jesus is the Lord of Sabbath. And again, this is not something that Jesus just takes for granted, that we're going to accept just because He said it. He's going to demonstrate the power that someone who is Lord of Sabbath would possess. So that's what we'll see here in verses 1 through 6. All right, it says, He entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a withered hand. So they watched him closely, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, Step forward. Then he said to them, Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil? To save life or to kill? But they kept silent. Even though that should be a very obvious question, right? It should be very simple that the focus of the Sabbath would be to do good, right? To save a life. Why would they not answer that question? It should be obvious to them. Why would they keep silent? Only because they have ulterior motives. It's not really about getting to the truth with them. It's just about maintaining the status quo. Don't let anybody rock the boat kind of situation. Verse 5. And when he had looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. Now, is he lifting anything heavier than a dried fig? Stretching out your hand, is that work just to do this? Is that a violation of Sabbath to just do this? No. No violation here. Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and immediately plotted with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. Boy, the irony is thick in this story. All right, let's go back over. So they're back in the synagogue at Capernaum. This man is there who had a withered hand. I don't know if his hand was born deformed in this way from birth, or if this was caused by an accident, or whatever the case may be. In any way, he's got this hand that is deformed and not useful. And it must have been an awkward thing for him to be in the synagogue in this condition. The Bible tells us that, Bible and tradition tells us it was very common for Jews to lift up their hands like this, lift up holy hands we have in Romans 16. When they prayed, they would bow their heads and lift their hands out like this. And can you imagine, it would have been a little bit of an embarrassment, I think, for this man to lift up his hand unto God in this condition, especially with the prevailing thought back then that if something bad happened to you, God must have caused it to punish you for something bad that you did. And whether that's true or not, and it's not true, that was probably the prevailing thought for this man. And every time he's lifting up this withered hand unto the Lord. So what a cause of suffering this was for this man on many different levels. But was not a life-threatening situation. One of those traditions of the rabbis was that medical care could not be administered to a person unless it was a situation where there was like a pregnant woman delivering a baby, or a situation where it was a life-threatening situation and the person would not live past the Sabbath day. No matter how sick they might be, if they could live through it to the first day of the week, you were to leave them alone, according to the tradition of the elders, the scribes. So this withered hand is not a life-threatening situation. So again, it's a situation where we're not violating the law of God, but we are violating the traditions of the people, their opinions. And Jesus knows what He's about to do, but as He begins, He asks the man to step forward. He wants everyone to see what's about to happen. And He asks this question. And I love it. I love His question. Is it lawful to do good or to do evil on the Sabbath day? See, what Jesus does in His masterful way, the masterful teacher, is He cuts straight through all the confusion. Stop worrying about walking 3,000 feet or 3,001 feet. Stop worrying about whether you threw the item up in your right hand or your left hand and which one you're going to catch it in, or whether the cold water is going into hot water or hot water is going into cold water. Forget all of that stuff and ask yourself this: is it good or is it evil? If it's good, do it on the Sabbath day, because that will honor God, and the day is about God. It's about worship. It's about focus on Him. If it's evil, don't do it. Just cut through all of that confusion and reduce it down to this: if it's the Sabbath day, do good. Do good. Because what is the chief command? Love God. What's the second greatest command? Love your neighbor. There's no better way to honor God than to obey these two commands. And that's what good is. Good. To do good or do evil. To save a life or to kill it. Just make it, don't make it more difficult than God intended for it to be. They won't answer the question, so He's about to give them the answer in a quite a visual way. He says, and he's angry. He's furious, and who wouldn't be? More and more, I think about the tremendous stress on Jesus with these Pharisees. Just knowing that He's going into a situation where every single little thing He does or says, He knows it's being scrutinized. They're watching every move He makes. They're listening to everything He says. They are constantly scrutinizing it, and they are constantly looking for something that they can use against Him. Can you imagine the immense amount of pressure that goes along with that? Stress. And the text pinpoints His emotional response to this. He's angry. He's also hurt and sad and grieved at the hardness of their hearts. That they're just so stubborn in their ways that they refuse to be open-minded to the truth, which is staring them right in the face. It's right there in front of them. They insist and they refuse. They're not going to go any direction other than the direction they want to go. And He is angry and hurt by it. And He would have made life much easier for Himself to just walk away and go somewhere else. But that's not His nature. Watch Him, scrutinize Him, criticize Him all you want to. He's still going to do what's right. And He's still going to teach the truth. I find that powerful. I know many of you, you go into situations in your family or in your workplace where maybe you're under a different level of scrutiny because you're a member of the church, or you're a Christian. People watch what you say, watch what you do. They're looking, just looking for something they can use, not just against you, but against your religion and against the church. The Lord knows what it's like to be in that position. And He can help and intercede and give you help you to have the courage that you need to do what's right anyway. And stand for the truth anyway, just like He did. So He says to the man, stretch out your hand. And it's interesting, Jesus is careful to do this in a way that nothing He says or nothing He asks the man to do is really a violation of the Sabbath day. Just stretch out your hand. And as He stretches out His hand, Jesus doesn't say, be healed. like he did with some of the other miracles? He doesn't say anything, does he? All he says is stretch out your hand. And as the man stretches out his hand, the hand is well. What does that tell you? Where did the power come from for this wonderful miracle? It came from heaven. That has to be the most obvious thing here. If it was a violation of the Sabbath for this man to be healed, then why on earth would God grant the power for this miracle to happen? Would God violate His own law regarding the Sabbath? Would He give the power to heal this man of his withered hand if it was wrong to heal this man of his withered hand? Of course not. That's why I say the hardness of the heart of these Pharisees to miss what was so obvious, what was right there in front of them. This miracle should have demonstrated that everything Jesus had said was true. But instead, how did they react to it? Look down at verse 6. First of all, they team up with the Herodians. That amazes me. These were people who despised Roman oppression. But the Herodians were sympathizers. They supported the Herods, the Herod family, this ruling dynasty, who were sympathetic to the Romans. That's what I say, the irony is thick with this situation. But they team together with the Herodians because even though the Pharisees and the Herodians really have two opposing agendas, at this moment in time, they both want the same thing, which is to get rid of Jesus. And so they start to plot together about how to destroy him. Question: is that an appropriate thing to do on the Sabbath? To plot to have someone killed for doing good, for helping someone in need? Does that sound like an appropriate way to honor God on the Sabbath day? To plot murder? Obviously not. And so the irony, the contrast is thick here between these two positions. Okay, but again, cutting through all of that and getting back to what is really the main point that we're to take away from this. And for me, what it is this: Jesus is the Lord of Sabbath, just like He is the Lord of everything. And because of that, whatever He has said, that's it. That's the final word on all matters doctrinal and practical. That's the point that we're to come away with. And we are not to question whether or not what He taught is true. Okay? All right, anybody have a comment or question? All right, moving on from that, and coming down to verse 7. It says, "But Jesus withdrew with His disciples to the sea. And a great multitude from Galilee followed Him, and from Judea, and Jerusalem, and Idumea, and beyond the Jordan, and those from Tyre and Sidon, a great multitude, when they heard how many things He was doing, came to Him. So He told His disciples a small boat should be kept ready for Him because of the multitude, lest they should crush Him. For He healed many, so that as many as had afflictions pressed about Him to touch Him. And the unclean spirits, whenever they saw Him, fell down before Him and cried out, saying, You are the Son of God. But He sternly warned them that they should not make Him known." And so, again, we see how the influence is growing of what He's saying and doing, how people are coming out to hear and to see what He is doing. But what is specifically important about this is Mark going to mention all these different groups who are coming. They're converging on the wilderness in Galilee to hear about this preacher. And they're coming from Galilee, which is closest, but also they're coming from the south. They're coming from Judea and Jerusalem, very heavy area of staunch Jewish people. But they're also coming from areas east of the Jordan River, Idumea and other territories. Now, where you would have primarily Jews in Judea and Jerusalem, this area over here east of the Jordan River, well, that's sort of a mixed group. There are a lot of Jews over there too, but there are a lot of others, more mixed groups. There's Gentiles populating those areas too. Then when you go northwest from Galilee to Tyre and Sidon, which are on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, well, that's a very heavily Gentile area. Later on, Jesus is going to visit that area, and that's when you have the whole story of him and the Canaanite woman. I love that story, but we'll save that one for another time. But that's a heavily populated Gentile area. And you have these people converging from all over. And the reason that this seems to be significant is it looks like the Lord's kingdom is starting to take shape. Because from the very beginning, that was His intent, Jesus, to bring Jew and Gentile together, to eliminate that wall of separation between Jew and Gentile people, Ephesians Chapter 2. And seemingly, this is already seeming to happen on its own and take shape. All people are just genuinely drawn to Him. And so, but it is creating quite a dangerous situation for Jesus. They're just converging on Him so heavily that at times He has to keep a boat ready just so He can get away from them for a moment, because there's such a heavy demand on Him at this time. But He doesn't turn them away. He continues to do what He came to do. Real quickly, let's go over this next section. We can get through that. Verse 13, He went up on a mountain. And by the way, Luke's account of this tells us, and when He went up into that mountain, He spent all night in prayer. This was an important moment in His ministry. And He did not make this decision before He had intensely gone to God about it in prayer. But He went up into the mountain and called to Him those He Himself wanted. These are the ones He's handpicked for a special job. And they came to Him, and then He appointed 12. 12 has a lot of significance in the Bible. 12 tribes in the Old Testament. And often enough, when something spectacular would happen, they'd take a leader from each tribe. So you'd have, for example, when they sent the spies into the land, they sent 12 spies because of that. So carrying along with that overall theme, Jesus chooses 12. Continuing in verse 14, that they might be with Him, and that He might send them out to preach, and to have power to heal sickness, and to cast out demons. Simon, to whom He gave the name Peter, he's always mentioned first in the list of the apostles. He's a natural leader among them, taking the front row a lot of the times. And so he's always mentioned first. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James. Those three constituted His inner circle. There were times He took them when He didn't take any of the rest of the 12. They seemed to be His closest friends and confidants during His life here upon this earth. James and John, He gave the name Boanerges. I never get this right. Well, whatever it is, it means sons of thunder. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who's always mentioned last in the list of the apostles, who also betrayed Him. And they went into a house. But here is 12 apostles. Their job is going to be to carry on this ministry after He has returned to heaven, finish the completion of the New Testament, and get the church established once it is brought into existence. But it's interesting to me the way verse 14 describes their training, that they might be with Him. Be with Him. That should always be the focus of any disciple of Jesus, to spend as much time with Jesus as you can. Spend as much time thinking about Him, spend as much time learning from Him, spend as much time praying through Him, spend as much time worshiping Him. Just be with Him as much as you can. In that connection, we find the instruction and the ability to be what He wants us to be. And only then are you equipped to go out and preach. to go out and share that with others, which Jesus empowered them to do. You know, one of the interesting things about these 12, they came from a diverse variety of backgrounds. But it's also remarkable how common they were. They weren't rabbis. They weren't priests. They weren't scribes. They were blue-collar fishermen, tax collectors, religious, fanatical people. But somehow they came together and they were united in their devotion to Jesus. And they turned the world upside down because of that. All right, we'll stop there. Anybody have a question or comment before we quit for today? All right, we'll pick up around verse 20 next week.